President Trump has said that he is going to make America affordable again. What does this mean for real estate? We're going to dig into the White House's press release and then their fact sheet on price relief for American families to defeat the cost of living crisis. Because with everyone I talk to, we all know inflation is this hidden tax. Everything is costing more. And so why? And what can President Trump actually do? What was he saying in these statements? What can actually be done at the federal level to help the average American with the cost of everything? And how does that relate to one of our favorite topics, good old real estate? One of the ways that President Trump plans to do this is by unleashing oil. He said, drill, baby, drill. And ending Biden's policies of climate extremism, streamline the permitting process, and reviewing for rescission the burdensome implications that have imposed undue burdens on energy, production, and use, including mining and processing of non-fuel materials. What does that mean? Obviously, President Trump is trying to get us back more towards fossil fuels, get us away from the Green New Deal. He said that he's going to empower consumers to have choices in their vehicles, their shower heads, their toilets, their washing machines, their light bulbs, and their dishwashers. Part of this is repealing the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's stopping a lot of that spending and removing what's being a limit to these fossil fuels. On a certain level, what President Trump did was absolutely brilliant. He declared a state of emergency, a national energy emergency. It's symbolic, and it's reflecting his promise of energy expansion, and it specifically then urges or pushes the federal government through the use of like eminent domain and the Defense Product Act to allow the government to commandeer private land and resources to produce goods deemed public or in national security. They're talking to the Army Corps of Engineers about streamlining their process. A lot of people haven't dealt with them, but in the development process, when you got to go to the Army Corps of Engineers, realize it's going to take you anywhere between 18 to 36 months to get through their process. So if he's saying to the Army Corps of Engineers, speed this up, get this done faster, it streamlines and speeds up energy products to make us more energy independent. And the thought here, it's smart, it's good, it's bad all at the same time. One, I still love my trees and I got kids. And so we have to have some type of climate control here for the future. Number two, being in an energy independent country is super important. Being an energy independent country is super important for national security and for our economy. The cheaper oil gets, the easier it is for our whole economy to work. Why? We're a petroleum-based economy. So as the price of oil goes down, the price of delivering everything gets easier. The price of manufacturing gets less. It becomes less of a burden on the economy. Next, President Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. There are some estimates that say this will save the U.S. up to $2 billion. And that's just in actual savings. That's not in additional regulatory savings. However, once again, the con of this is as we reduce some of these climate actions, we're not taking measures to help ensure we have a future. President Trump's point with things like this, though, is that the regulatory burden has become so cumbersome and such a big factor that it's slowing down the whole economy. And if you're like me and you run a business and you realize just the sheer level of paperwork that has to be filed for everything, the sheer level of agencies that you have to report to, it just requires more staff. It requires more time, which means more money and more resources go to this. If the U.S. is going to remain a global dominant power, it has got to remove some of these burdens because it's currently strangleholding the U.S. It's preventing us from growing. He said that all agencies need to take an emergency measures to reduce the cost of living. This is one of those statements that's almost more a bit of rhetoric. There's nothing that he can do that's going to dramatically just immediately cause prices to come down, to cause inflation to come down. They can impact policies, they can make change, but it will all take a lot of time. So this affordability agenda really extends into then our area of housing. Understand that the median price here in the United States reached $420,000, up from about $329,000 in 2020. That's even in the face of 7% mortgage rates. Here in the Seattle Metro where I live, what we've seen is south of Seattle, the median price is about $500. In the Seattle area, it's about $800 to $900. Over onto the east side, it's about $1 million. And then when you go north of that, it's in the $700 to $800. So I live in an area that's wildly unaffordable relative to the rest of the country, or about double, and in some cases triple, the national average. And what President Trump was proposing was to increase the housing supply through deregulation and then incentivizing local governments to simplify the zoning and the permitting process. This initiative goes to enable the construction of more single-family homes and multifamily units. Because according to Zillow, we're about 4.5 million units behind on housing from the great financial crisis. Trump mentions about 25% of the cost of a home is due to regulatory burden. I don't disagree with him. And then in areas like where I live in the Seattle Metro, there are some estimates to show that number to be as high as 35%. To give you an example, I've been working on a permit here in a local city for the past 3 years, and we still don't have it. We have spent $114,000 trying to get this building permit, and we still don't have it. That should have been 6 months. It should have been $25,000. Now, that's an extreme example. I would say most of the cases and most of the circumstances here in the Seattle Metro is you're looking at anywhere between 6 months to a year, and you're looking at between probably like 40 grand to as much as 80, 90 grand, maybe 100 on the high side in order to get that. The problem is that delayed timeline, that slow timeline, the building code, the energy efficiency code, the additional plans checks, the permit checks, things like that. All of that just slows the process down. The longer it takes to build the home and the more regulation that's sitting in its way, the more costly the home is. The head of economic research at Redfin, Chen Zhao, said, he's right that the lack of supply is the root cause that is keeping home prices high. So I feel like it's really well intentioned. But the issue is not a lot of regulatory burdens in terms of cost of construction. It's not actually something the federal government can deal with. Most of these burdens are on the local level. So all the federal government can do in relation to this is simply lean on the local government to get them to work. If you want to massively impact change in your local area, get involved with city council, county council, get involved with the planning commission, the planning department, and figure out why they're doing what they're doing, because these local people and organizations are what are causing your housing to cost so much in your local area. Now back to more of what he said. He's ordering the head of executive departments and agencies at the federal level to look into this, but I'm not sure what kind of impact they can have other than leaning on local governments to try to incentivize them to streamline regulation and make it easier to construct housing. Basically what we just said right there. Now he's looking into what federal agencies like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, and VA could do. There are lots of fees when you're trying to get a mortgage. So the heads of these agencies could explore ways to reduce these fees, but understand the margins are pretty small. Having said that, looking at just a FHA loan, for example, so a lot of home buyers are using an FHA loan. That mortgage insurance product on the FHA loan, it never goes away. It's extremely high. Now, I'm not saying it should go all the way away, but that number should be able to be pinched down a little bit. Now, mortgage insurance, it does not protect the buyer. It protects the lender. So some of that could definitely pinch down and make housing more affordable. President Trump also announced the America First trade policy about imposing tariffs and talked about implementing these tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China. He threatened a 25% tariff against Canada and Mexico if certain concerns were not addressed by February of this year. They then talked about corporate tax incentives to attract businesses to operate inside the U.S. with a policy that proposes a corporate tax rate be lowered to 15% for companies to relocate to American soil. He also said America will no longer be beholden to foreign organizations for our national tax policy, which punishes American businesses. What he's specifically referring to here is the global corporate minimum tax deal negotiated by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, I'd never heard of this organization, which aimed to establish a 15% minimum tax rate on multinational corporations. On January 20th, President Trump declared this agreement as having no force or effect on the U.S. and effectively pulling us out of the deal. By rejecting these international frameworks, the administration is seeking to regain control of our national tax policies, seeking to attract outside businesses, seeking to change our energy policies, seeking to lower regulation and speed up housing. They're nailing it, though, on the supply side. The supply side here is our biggest issue. If you fix supply, rents will go down and the price of homes will go down. Now, I'm not talking price crashes. I'm actually talking the rate of increase. We are so far behind on housing that if we simply massively increase supply, you would see price stabilization first and just a slowing of the rate of growth. And that would be phenomenal. Don't expect to see a price crash, a 2008 style recession or great financial crisis where all of a sudden there's so many homes. We can't build them fast enough in today's market, nor do I believe that President Trump will be able to affect this enough on the local level. It's going to take me and you on the local level. As we switch into the next version of this topic and start to look at this from another angle, the fact sheet from the White House, please hit that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. For those of you that are listening to us on something like Apple or Spotify, we could use more ratings there. Drop us your questions below as we go. As always, we want to have that conversation with you. What I love is that the White House releases this information. This is the fact sheet from President Trump about price relief for American families to defeat the cost of living crisis. So in case you didn't know, the White House always releases these, but I want to read these to you and I want to have a conversation real quickly about it. The President Memorandum recognizes a critical component of the crushing cost of everyday living. The Biden administration imposed complex regulatory burdens and radical policies to weaken American production. Now, I don't disagree with this. What I do disagree with is I think this is a bit unfair. This is throwing the Biden administration under the bus right here and blaming all of the inflation on the Biden administration, where the inflation did also start with the Trump administration, because this inflation was due to the overprinting of the money. President Trump is ordering all federal agencies to untangle the American economy from Biden constraints and improve affordability of necessary goods and services and increase the prosperity of American workers. I love it. Let's just wave a magic wand and all of a sudden everyone is making more money. This includes action to drastically lower the cost of housing and expand housing supply. Like I had mentioned, this is the biggest issue. Housing supply is the biggest issue. It's supply, supply, supply. I got in one of the comments, and I forget if it was on YouTube or if it was over there on TikTok or Instagram, but someone said we don't have a housing supply crisis problem. We have a lack of foreclosure problem. And they believed there was shadow inventory that was going to magically hit the market and solve the supply issue. What I want to encourage you to do is, if you don't believe me, go to the Federal Reserve St. Louis's website. Go look at the number of new homes that we've built and then go back to the great financial crisis. You're going to see this big V right there in the data. That's where we're missing. It's when all of those banks started to crash in the great financial crisis and lending got super tight. What happened is we built dramatically less. And I think the number was like 80% less or 70% less homes in 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12 because the economy sucked and it was so hard to get financing. There is your supply problem. Now, during that process, the federal government, the local governments, your city, your county governments, your state governments, all increase the regulatory burden against housing. How do I know this? Because I've been involved in land development and new construction since the early 2000s. And over 20 years, all it has done is get tougher, longer timelines, and cost more money. And yes, I realize I live here in the Seattle metro, but that's also been true in other states. We just happen to be one of the worst here on the coast. Eliminate unnecessary administrative expenses and rent-seeking practices that drive up healthcare costs. Eliminate counterproductive requirements raising the cost of home appliances. What is he talking about there? What they're talking about there is there are hot water tanks, there are dishwashers that in order to have a certain level of energy efficiency, in order to not use a certain amount of power, to be in compliance with those things, they have actually become less effective tools. They don't last as long. They burn out quicker. That's what they're specifically referring to, is that some of these requirements are making those appliances cost more and just plain function worse. Create employment opportunities for workers, including drawing discouraged workers into the labor force. I don't know how you can get the American population back into the level of workforce participation that we had pre-COVID. We are not getting back there. And so whatever we need to do, that would be great. And we also need to continue. So my fear from part of all of this is that the immigration policies are going to get so tight that we're going to prevent these awesome, amazing professionals that we need. We need to be able to recruit that talent here to the U.S. and bring them in. And it's not about just getting Americans to work and do more. It's about recruiting talented people, getting a workforce from outside the U.S. to come in and help keep our economy moving and great. Eliminate harmful, coercive climate policies driving up the costs of food and fuel. End Biden's war on affordability. The Biden administration's destructive policies inflicted a historic inflation crisis on the American people. Once again, not totally fair, very biased in that comment right there. Hardworking families are overwhelmed by the cost of food, fuel, housing, automobiles, medical care, utilities, and insurance. Absolutely. I 100% agree with this. And what we've really been seeing on the real estate side is kind of this bifurcated market. And what I mean by that is, the bottom end of the market where it's very affordable, below the median, that's where that first-time home buyer is buying. It's where, all the activity is happening. That is having a flurry of activity. The middle's a little bit slower. And then the top, where people have a lot of assets, is super busy. Just this last weekend, we put on an affordable home in South Everett. We put on not an expensive home for Bellevue, but expensive based on the local Seattle metro. That one came on at 1.9. The one in Everett came on at $630,000. The one at $630,000, multiple offers, bidding war, sold for slightly more with great contingencies. The one in Bellevue is just a little bit east of Seattle, another one of our centers of our real estate universe. It had 45 showings. It had 50 people come through the open house. It received 9 offers, $200,000 earnest money, non-refundable, went almost 200 grand over the list price. Blew my mind. Didn't expect it to go that high. But that's what's happening. This inflation is the hidden tax that's hurting the middle and below the most, while the asset bases are experiencing what we call the great asset meltup. That's another video that you can go watch here on the channel if you want to learn more about that one. Unprecedented regulatory oppression from the Biden administration has imposed almost $50,000 in the cost of the average American household, whereas Trump's first-term agenda reduced regulatory costs by $11,000 per household. I'm not sure where they're getting this figure, but I would agree that the average consumer is feeling overwhelmed by costs and regulatory burden and regulatory capture. Americans are unable to purchase homes at historic rates, in part due to the regulatory requirements that account for 25% of the construction costs of new homes. And like I said before, here in the Seattle Metro, that number's even higher. It's between 30 to 35%. And people go, how do you make housing cheaper in Seattle? You make them easier to build. You make the land development process easier. You make the whole process quicker. Our governor said, hey, you're going to get your fees waived if they don't fulfill and get the timeline done on time. All that's actually going to do is change the way they calculate the timeline. They're going to kick out the applications without full applications. They're going to immediately click it. You're like, oh, it's back in Anton's court. Not my problem. So they're basically going to go through the deny route versus we need to go through the automate AI and streamline the code process. Biden's assault on plentiful and reliable American energy through impossible, unnecessary, and illegal regulatory demands have driven up the cost of transportation and manufacturing. Sort of true. Also, geopolitical conflict, wars, and the Saudis lowering production. All of this has played into oil. This isn't just an at-home in the U.S. thing. This is a global thing. Biden's war on energy has been a war on the American consumer. Households are paying an average of $1,200 more per year in energy costs under Biden's policies since he took office. Total energy costs rose by 36% in gasoline, 41% for energy of the home, 31% electricity bills, and gas 34%. What are you feeling? Are you feeling like your bills are up that much? Do you feel like Trump's to blame? Biden's to blame? They're all to blame? I think the money printer is definitely to blame. He goes on to pontificate about how the average price per gallon was $2.77 and it was $2.33 when he left office. And just 1 year later, it was $3.33, and then it hit a high of $5. The moral to the story is this, and thank you for our listeners and subscribers who've been with me during this whole journey. We're saying a lot of feel-good stuff here, but to dramatically change housing, we have to change supply, and that has to happen on the local level. And that's going to require you, and that's going to require me getting involved in order to make that happen. I want to flip it over for my investors real quick. That's your massive opportunity. Your opportunity is anything that creates supply. And as the federal government changes some of these things, and as local governments change, that's our opportunities. Rates are still really high, and they're predicted to be higher than we had anticipated for the rest of 2025. So if you'd like to discuss more opportunities, hey, you know how to get a hold of us at resg.com. You can drop something in the comments. We'd love to chat with you. As always, thank you for listening.